Hello and welcome to Patient World. Today we're blessed to have with us a special guest. This is Monica Buzzell. Welcome to the show, Monica.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, can we start by your telling the viewing audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, like you said, my name is Monica Buzzell, and I live in Vermont. I have celiac disease, and I have a health coaching business called Blissfully Gluten-Free. I was diagnosed with celiac disease back in 2014, and I've been gluten-free ever since. And so I'm here to help people live that blissfully gluten-free life. And yeah, that's my brief story
Okay.
kind of thing.
Okay. So, what can you tell the audience? What was beneficial for you? What tips can you tell them to improve their lives?
Okay. One of the first things for me that was challenging is, when I looked at a pack, first of all, gluten-free, what does that mean, right? So I'm looking at packages of food, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, this doesn't have gluten in it. It doesn't say that it has wheat in it. It doesn't say that it has barley or rye, because those are the three, main grains that have gluten in them. And I thought, well, okay, I'll just eat those foods, and eat other ones that are gluten free. And back then, there are a lot less foods that are gluten free than there is today. But so I realized through time that it's important for me and everyone who is on gluten-free diet, to really look at the food labeling and what are the ingredients in that package. And I have found, and it goes really beyond food. I mean, I was diagnosed, and then I had a period of time where I was still getting gluten in my body, and I didn't know how or why. And even though I thought I was eating a gluten-free diet, I realized that it was in my lip balm of all places.
Wow.
Um, and the lip balm doesn't it's not under the same FDA FDA rules of gluten-free, but it didn't tell me, and I didn't know that he had wheat in it. But in any case, the gluten-free goes beyond just foods. But it's important for people to realize that you look at the packaging, look at the ingredients. If there's wheat in it, then it should be labeled with wheat or contains wheat, because that's a different FDA ruling or regulations. And if it has wheat in it, it has to specifically state there are 9 allergens that have to be put on packages if the food itself contains that, and wheat is one of them. But also looking for gluten-free on the package, and or certified gluten-free. Those are two important things. And if people find foods that have gluten-free or certified gluten-free on the packaging, then their risk of getting cross-contaminated with gluten is much lower, and thus you will have fewer symptoms than if you had foods that didn't have gluten-free labeling on it, kind of thing. So that was a big challenge for me, and it took me months to figure that out. um, Kind of like M&Ms. M&Ms packaging doesn't have wheat in it, but if you go to their website, they say, "Oh, sure, these M&Ms are gluten free." But it's not following the FDA regulations for gluten free labeling. Then saying, okay, if it's gluten free is on the package, then they know they have to be under 20 parts per million of gluten and that sort of thing. So, anyways, and the second thing is that most of the food that we typically ate prior to having a diagnosis of celiac disease or gluten sensitivity or even wheat allergy, we can still get many, if not all of those foods, um, labeled as gluten free. Like ketchup, Heinz ketchup has gluten free ketchup. Soy sauce. There's soy sauces available that are gluten free. So you just gotta kind of take your time to look and review, you know, in a grocery store or online, to see what foods are gluten-free and what foods are not, and then purchase those things. And those things are typically not any more expensive than the gluten containing, or not even necessarily gluten containing, but other foods, other like ketchups that are not labeled as gluten-free. So there's a lot more foods available now than when I was diagnosed back in 2014. So so it should be fairly easy for people to find foods that are, gluten-free sort of thing.
So let me ask you this. Do you notice any significant difference in the taste of the foods?
Uh,
Gluten-free
I,
versus,
yeah, I don't, and the other thing too is that a lot of I'm going to say condiment or the staples that we have in our house, ketchup, mustard, rice, um, you know, our barbecue sauce, those type of things. Those are manufactured many times by companies that we know, like Heinz ketchup has gluten-free. I mean, they also have ketchup that's not gluten-free too. So I don't notice the taste difference in those. Where it gets a little bit, where it can get a little bit more challenging is when you're talking about packaged, uh, pre-made, foods, because gluten in packaged foods, like typically when you buy packaged foods, the gluten-free in particular, there tends to be, and I'm talking about process, like if you wanted to have a cookie or whatever, the ingredients that are used in those are a bit different than if you're buying a package of cookies that are gluten. So there's flours and other ingredients that kind of, that are used in place of gluten to create the texture and the ingredients to make those processed foods. So there's a little bit of a different taste to those, sometimes a little bit different texture. But the one thing, so there are those foods available out there. There are a lot of gluten-free, pre-made foods, because I think one of the hardest things is the baked goods that are hard, for people, because people want those same things, and a lot of those baked goods are are we have those at times of, our traditions, based on, holidays, based on socializing. Like typically when we get together, we tend to eat, right? And so it's challenging in that we have to think about when we get diagnosed with, having to eat, diagnosed with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, that we don't have to give up those foods per se. We just have to replace those foods with other foods, other gluten-free foods. And there are, like with the packaged or pre-made foods, there are a lot of options out there, but you also can do a lot of baking on your own. I do I probably do 90% of my baking with gluten-free. Well, I do all of the baking with gluten-free flours and gluten-free flour blends, but I rarely buy pre-made packaged, gluten-free baked goods. So I want people to realize that it's also pretty easy to make those foods we want. And there are a lot of great recipes and websites available that have great recipes, so that they can, have those foods that we once loved, like really good gluten-free chocolate chip cookies, or really good, pumpkin muffins, or a cake, or pancakes, or whatever the food they're looking for. So there's a lot of options out there. It's just a matter of people taking the time, or really replacing what they once had with something that's gluten free, and maybe even learning to bake or baking those things at home. And there are flour blends out there that kind of are like a pseudo replacement for the wheat flour and that sort of thing. So there are some good flours out there today that can really be helpful for that.
so if a person is just going to a regular grocery store and she goes up and down the aisles, will she be able to find the flour and all of those things that she needs, or does she have to go someplace special?
Well, the grocery stores today really have a lot of ingredients and a lot of the things you need to do what you need to do at home. Like if you wanted to make a cake or make pancakes, you can go to the store, and purchase. These are the two flour blends that I tend to use: is Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 gluten-free flour blend, and there's also King Arthur Measure for Measure flour blends, which you can take those flours and replace the gluten, in gluten flour that's in those recipes you once used. It's important though, to realize a couple of things. One is that you can replace one for one with gluten flour with the gluten-free flour, but you in baked goods. But
Uh-huh.
with the yeast yeast, doughs and yeast breads, that's, you can't replace one for one for that. You have to, there are some other components, and that could be psyllium powder, it could be apple cider vinegar, it could be baking powder in addition to the ingredients. So I would recommend people to look for recipes and that you can use for their yeast baked goods, and follow those recipes exactly like that. Whereas baked goods, cookies or cakes or muffins or quick breads like banana bread or something, you can pretty much basically replace the gluten flour with the gluten-free flour blends. You can't do it, gluten-free flour blends are a mixture of some grains and some starches and a binder. And so it's important to get a flour blend that has those things to do a replacement one for one kind of thing. The other thing that's important to realize is that when you're replacing the gluten flour with a gluten-free flour blend, the flour should be weighed so that, if the recipe calls for, a cup of gluten flour, that you weigh your gluten-free flour blend and so that it weighs about 135 to 140 grams per, so that would be, 1 cup equivalent sort of thing. Because, the tapioca flour or cornstarch or sorghum flour or whatever is, those individual components can be very light or very heavy. And so it's important when you're using those flour blends to weigh it. If you're going to be doing recipes where you're replacing your gluten flour with a gluten-free flour. There are other recipes online, that you can look and search for, like meaningfuleats.com is one place I use quite a bit. And she has recipes she's developed where she may state the actual weight, or she may use cups, but her recipes are designed, to follow, this is my recipe and these are the specific notes or instructions that you need to do, because each author has their own little recipe creations and such. So it's important just to follow a recipe as is if you're going to be searching for like meat at meaningfuleats.com, and following the recipe just as she has stated.
So where would a person get a scale like this?
Well, you can find them online, Amazon, Walmart, Kohl's, Target, those sort of things. And they should, where even in your local grocery store may have them too. I'm not really sure. I think I've seen those in our local grocery store here in Vermont. But
So I'm going to switch just a moment to talk about something a little bit different.
sure.
You're a health coach as well.
Yes.
So can you tell us the benefits of having a health coach?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. What would you say?
The benefits of having a health coach.
Oh, yes. Well, I recognized for myself, diagnosed with celiac, through time I realized how overwhelming or how confused, like how overwhelming it is to first of all get the diagnosis of celiac disease, but then secondly, have your change of a lifestyle, how overwhelming it was for me, and I'm a family of 4. So it was very, it's like, when my first thought was, I'm going to starve to death because gluten is in everything, like everything. I mean, I had already lost some weight anyways, but how was I ever going to eat anything? And so one of the things that I do is I help people kind of set up systems in place in their household and help them reduce overwhelm that can happen when you're going from a gluten world to this gluten-free world, because it is overwhelming. There's so many things to think about, and it takes longer for things, in addition to not feeling well, because generally we get the diagnosis when we're not feeling well. We're not feeling well for a reason. We go to the doctor, we get blood work, we may have an endoscopy or what have you, and we're not feeling well. So everything is kind of coming together, the diagnosis and the whole change of moving from gluten world to a gluten-free world, and just taking that all in. It's overwhelming. And so one of the things that I believe that was helpful for people is to kind of set up a system together. There's some people I hear where their whole household is gluten-free. Other people I hear, they have a mixture of gluten eaters and gluten-free eaters. And I think both can work. It's just a matter of what works for your household. So one of the things I try to do for people is to help them create a system in their household that works for them, and help them understand there's a feeling of loss that happens because you won't be eating gluten. And then in our minds, we're thinking we won't be able to eat our pizza. We won't be able to eat our cookies. We won't be able to, and then the disease that we have, this lifelong disease. I mean, the good thing about the disease is that if you stop eating gluten, you really feel well, which is great. You know what I mean? You don't have to take any pills. You don't have to get, any kind of, vaccines or anything like that. So that's great, but I think a health coach can um, help people through the process of, getting the diagnosis, setting up systems to help them really live a blissfully gluten-free life, and help them reduce the stress that can happen, and socializing can be really hard too. And so there's lots of tips I can give people to help them set themselves up well, so that they can basically live the life they once had, but with a little bit of um, little bit of tweaks here and there, and also to reduce the gluten symptoms that people have. It's about risk. If you're going to be risky with what you eat, then you might feel a little unwell, through time. And so I think it's important for people to have, just an idea what, how to reduce, their risks, and help, which thus then reduces their symptoms, and then they'll feel a whole lot better, kind of thing. So.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there anything else you want to share with the audience before we go?
Well, I have a website. It's blissfullyglutenfree.com. I offer, health coaching services. Occasionally I do webinars online. I'm also on Facebook under Monica Buzzell, and I do have a web page, Blissfully Gluten-Free, as my business page. I'm also on LinkedIn as well. So there's 3 different places there they can contact me.
And at the end of this video, I am going to have a list of all of your contact information, and also in the text of the description, so people will know how to reach you if they want to reach out and have any of their questions answered or move forward. So I want to thank you again for coming on the show today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
You have a blessed day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.